Welcome to Writing and Teaching with the Drew Writing Project and Digital Literacies Collaborative. Today we are going to be talking about using mentor texts in the high school writing classroom, and I'm your host, Kristen Turner. I'm director of the Drew Writing Project and Digital Literacies Collaborative, and I am joined by two of our DWP-DLC teacher consultants, Shannon Faulkner and Gary Pankowitz. Thanks for being here today. I'm going to let the two of you introduce yourselves and your context. So Shannon, who are you and where are you from?
My name is Shannon Faulkner, and I'm a classroom teacher at Chatham High School. I teach ninth and 12th grade English language arts, and I'm obviously a teacher consultant with the Drew Writing Project.
Thanks, Shannon, for being here. How about you, Gary?
Hi, so my name is Gary. I am with you as a teacher and as a writer. I work as a K-12 language arts supervisor, and I also adjunct at Montclair State in the writing studies department.
Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to be chatting with you about using mentor texts. I know that both of you are very skilled at using mentor texts. And we are actually going to be digging into some lessons that you've created for use in the classroom in this COVID situation where we have students who are in person, students who are virtual, students who are doing work in asynchronous, meaning not at the same time as everybody else, contexts, and then students who are live streaming into the classroom. So basically it's kind of an all for everything in education right now. And it's hard to be a teacher, especially a teacher of writing. So I appreciate that you've taken some time to talk with us about how you are designing lessons for this context. Shannon, could you tell us a little bit about the lesson that you designed and what you're going to be talking about today?
Sure, it was an introduction for students to the concept of mentor texts. So it was in the expository writing genre. So the first thing I did was introduce students to the concept of mentorship kind of broadly. And then we started talking about what it means to look at a text as a mentor. And I introduced the term reading like a writer and the term craft moves. So those are both kind of unfamiliar terms for some students. So we start by looking at a picture book that is expository. It's The Brother Book by Todd Parr. And I read the book to students via video and kind of pause periodically to talk about some of the craft moves that I notice. Then I turn it over to them to do some work finishing the book and noting other craft moves that they see. Then we talk a little bit about purpose in terms of why the author might include those craft moves we noticed. And then it's time to move to an essay. So we look at an essay from during the Winter Olympics of 2018 by Sam Anderson in the New York Times Magazine. That's about cross-country skiing and what it reveals about the human condition. So now the register and the level of reading is a little bit higher. Students use a Google document to make some comments about craft moves they see and their intended purpose or effect. And then finally, I model for them how I might use the Sam Anderson essay to write my own essay, not about cross-country skiing, but about something that I see, that I participate in, that I think reveals something about the human condition. And I kind of walk them through my writing process and then turn it over to students for them to use the same mentor text to write about something that they participate in or have experience with that they think reveals something about the human condition.
So as you describe that lesson, I'm hearing one of the tenets of the National Writing Project, which is teacher as writer. I hear that you are doing some writing and sharing that and being a mentor writer with your students. I do want to ask you before we jump into Gary's lesson to define two terms that you mentioned there. The first is mentor text. We're talking about mentor text today, but what is a mentor text?
Gary and I have been using the definition, just a mentor text is any text that helps us as writers to learn about craft and grow our own writing. So just like a mentor in life kind of gives us guidance and help and support and helps us grow, a mentor text does the same thing, only instead of a person, it's a piece of writing, a professional piece of writing.
Okay, that's great. And then the second term, you actually kind of mentioned it in your definition to mentor text, is craft move. What is a craft move and what are we asking students to do when we talk about craft moves?
When I talk about craft moves with my students, I define it really broadly. It's really anything a writer does in order to achieve a particular effect or a purpose in writing. So it could be anything as basic as choosing to write in the first person as opposed to the third person, or choosing to write in the third person as opposed to the first person. Or it might be something like a particular punctuation, the use of an ellipses or a colon in a particular sentence. It can be something like using slang to establish voice. So the key thing to look for, the key question I ask students to look for is just, what do you notice? So when we look at a text, it's a really open-ended question. What do you notice about it? And that's kind of how we start pinpointing what we see in terms of craft moves.
That's great. Thank you. So as you described your lesson, it sounded like you were focusing on nonfiction work.
Yep.
Okay. And Gary, I think your work actually focused on fictional works or narratives, right? So can you tell us a little bit about the lesson you designed?
Yes, so I focused on the narrative genre. I do want to mention that, my lesson was inevitably enhanced just through working with Shannon. Like that collaboration was so helpful with co-planning and throwing ideas off of each other. And, I really appreciated that support. In my lesson, we start the same way. We're going to define author's craft, reading as writers, mentor texts, of course, and then was very fortunate to find a video by Naomi Shihab Nye where she reads her poem, Valentine for Earnest Man, because not only does she read her poem aloud, but she actually reflects on some of her craft moves within the poem. So being able to share that with students, hopefully, so that we can move into the next narrative, which is a personal narrative by Jason Kim, where he explores his life as a young student and emigrating from Korea into the United States. And from there, just noticing some of Kim's craft moves so that we could work on creating our own personal narratives.
That's great. So both of you have designed these lessons about using mentor text to enhance students' ability to write. And you've used the term reading like a writer. How does teaching with mentor texts help younger or developing writers?
One of the ways that I've seen it help students in my classroom is that it's sort of an alternative to offering students like a formula for writing. So I'll use expository writing. We often are tempted to give students kind of like an outline. Your first paragraph should do this, and your second paragraph should do this, and your third paragraph should do that. But what I've found in my experience is that students then get kind of hung up on the structure, and the content almost takes a backseat to structure. And they feel like if they just kind of follow the model that I've set forth, that, check in the box, I'm done. Part of the joy in writing, I guess, for me as a writer is making choices about, how am I going to open and what kind of voice do I want to craft? So in some ways, if we offer mentor text, we're giving students a lot of different options and exposure to a lot of different options, so that they can then say, oh, I kind of like the way that this writer crafted her voice. I wonder if I could do something similar. Or I love the opening that this writer chose. I wonder if I could do something similar and apply it to my content. So we're still giving them guidance and support and scaffolding, but we're also giving them that opportunity to experience the joy of making choices as writers.
I'd have to agree. I think one of the best parts about looking at authors' craft moves is encouraging students to take risks as writers. So I could tell you that, oftentimes I've leaned on a graphic organizer or a scaffold in that sense, because it does give you that great satisfaction of supporting students' organization and structure. But, it really doesn't do the job to try to provide some expert examples of craft moves where authors are taking risks and trying to do something a little bit different. You're not going to find a graphic organizer to support students in that way, like a great mentor text.
So it sounds like you're actually bringing other writers into the classroom and having those voices represented in the classroom as additional teacher voices for the students. And that's really at the heart of using mentor texts. What's rewarding about that for you as teachers and then for your student writers?
One of the things that I think is great about using mentor texts is that because we're looking at them for craft, we might return to them several times. So in some ways, it creates kind of this like community around certain texts that we've all read together and thought through together. So students feel a kind of like intimacy with these texts that that they carry with them throughout the course of the year, and I can make reference to them and pull them out as needed. So for me, it's kind of like I don't know, a little bag of tricks, I suppose, that when I'm teaching a particular writing skill, I can return to a text students are familiar with we don't have to necessarily worry about content because it's something we've read before, and we can just focus on the skill or the, the issue that we're talking about with regard to form or style.
I'd like to agree. I think just that work as a teacher writer is so rewarding. So we all love particular units because we dig in deeply in terms of like a thematic analysis or historical context. But you don't find many units that really do that work in craft. So it's a bit of a discovery. You're looking at the text through a different lens. And oftentimes students will find things that you didn't notice, and it just makes it exciting. And it's just a different way to look at a text and really focus on the writing, not necessarily the content of the unit, but how to support writing process for everyone involved, teacher and student alike.
You are making it sound just absolutely wonderful to bring mentor text in the classroom. But as a teacher, I know that not everything goes smoothly all the time. So have you faced any challenges in this kind of work?
Yes, definitely. I think one of the challenges is that when I first started working with mentor texts, I put a lot of pressure on myself to find, all these great mentor texts for, say, my editorial unit. And I wanted just the perfect pieces. And it was hugely time consuming. One thing that I've learned is just that, I can jump into this work with just one mentor text or two mentor texts on editorials and kind of build my library as I continue to read over the course of several years even. So that was a challenge, just kind of limiting the amount of time that I spend searching for mentor texts. As teachers, we love reading too. So it can be, something that you sort of get lost in to the exclusion of other things that need to get done. And sometimes, I choose a mentor text that just bombs. It doesn't work. And it almost for me always doesn't work when it's too long. I love long form journalism, and I'm always tempted to bring the stuff I find that is long form journalism into the classroom as mentor text. But I've found that you really want something you can get through in a class period, because otherwise it sort of, you lose the ability to talk about it holistically as a class. So I'll take excerpts, say, rather than the entirety of a particular piece that's on the longer side.
I definitely have to agree with that time element. So I love when my colleagues offer suggestions for particular texts, and I do like to try those texts out. But I'll tell you the best mentor texts that I found are ones that I found through my own discovery, the ones that I'm really passionate about, and then I'm incredibly invested in those texts in a different way. One other issue I just want to mention in terms of a predicament or a problem might be the reading level of the text. So if we do choose a text that's at a higher reading level or harder to for students to understand and comprehend, then you're spending a lot of the time going back and making sure you support the students' reading comprehension, which is incredibly important. But it's different than looking at the author's craft moves and focusing on their writing. So, that's sort of like a give and take too, choosing a text that, what's the one that you want to model that you're not necessarily going to have to support the reading comprehension, but then when can you move into those more sophisticated texts that are a little bit more nuanced? I think that's one of the challenges that I face.
Given these challenges, how do you find mentor texts? Where do you go?
A lot of it is just from my own reading. So I get LitHub emailed to me directly, and that's a great resource for mostly expository writing. When I think about poetry, poets.org is a great resource that, again, you can have a poem emailed to your inbox each day. So that's really helpful. And then, the New Yorker, the New York Times, the pieces, the publications outside online, things that I'm kind of reading anyway. I find, because I teach high school students, that some of that is really applicable and also might be kind of interesting to them as well.
I would agree that access is always an issue. So I know in our district, we've been leaning on commonlit.org. One of the best things about commonlit.org is it does provide grade level and reading level and some great questions to support and prompt student thinking and writing about the text. The New York Times just did offer schools an opportunity to have licenses for their students, which is awesome. Newsella is a paid site, but also has a lot of free resources as well.
So these are really coming out of your own reading habits. You are readers who are then turnkeying it into writing. Are there any professional texts that also help you with this work?
My go-to professional text is Rebecca Odell and Allison Marchetti, Writing with Mentors. That's kind of, I think, the quintessential teacher text on using mentor text in the classroom. And part of what I love about that text is that not only do they outline how they use mentor text in the classroom, but they actually provide mentor text that they use with QR codes. So you have like ready-made units. If I'm thinking off the top of my head, I use a critical review as a writing unit with my ninth graders, and I use mostly texts that I've gotten from that book that they've provided. So it was sort of like almost like a ready-made unit, and I loved the mentor text that they offered. So it saved me time in terms of getting that unit up and running.
I could say that a lot of my professional reading right now is dealing with cultural responsiveness. So I definitely take that into consideration when I'm choosing a mentor text, not only just to look for issues of social justice, because you're not always going to find that, but to look for voices that are going to provide some diverse perspectives. I know in the curriculum that I work with, a lot of times we are sort of static in looking at particular works within the canon that we want all students to read, but we're really trying to open that up. So a mentor text is the perfect place to, bring in diverse voices and challenge and think a little bit more outside of the box or what we normally think about.
Well, thank you for all of that information. I have one last question that I want to ask you, which is about doing all of this work in a situation where students might be asynchronously tuning into your classroom. So I know that the lessons that you designed were primarily meant for students to do asynchronously or on their own time. How do you have to adjust your teaching, or how did you go about designing for that context?
One of the things that Gary and I both did, and it was at his suggestion and it worked well, was to create a Google document that has embedded video so that students have kind of instructions about the content that they're producing, but access to the teaching via video so they can work kind of at their own pace. The other benefit of offering students, it's almost like a flipped classroom model where they're getting the instruction kind of on their own, and then we hope that that frees up teachers to be using their class time to conference with students or to help struggling writers as they draft or as they work through some of the activities. So giving them the instruction that they can listen to and view on their own, and then using class time, the precious little class time that teachers have right now, um, for that, teacher feedback and encouragement, I think is kind of the way to go when, our model for teaching looks so different than it has in the past.
I think we spent a good deal of time trying to make the direction super clear and keeping our videos short, and whenever possible, putting a little bit of the direction for the actual Google Doc work right in our video to support that further. I do want to also emphasize how important it is that if you're going to share that Google Doc with students, that you use it as a Google assignment and you use that feature where students are able to receive their own copy. And then it just becomes so much easier in terms of getting work back from students and being able to support that feedback loop where everyone's working on their own individual document.
Well, thank you. I know that this is not an easy time to be a teacher and to adapt everything that you've always done in face-to-face writing workshop classrooms into these new contexts. But it sounds like the lessons that you have designed are really supporting individual writers and a writing community. So that's really great. Shannon, what's your one takeaway from this work that you'd like to share with other teachers?
I guess have fun with it, because I think for a lot of us, we have been teaching for long enough that we can sometimes get mired in certain texts or certain units, and mentor texts actually like encourage me to shake things up and try new things that I wouldn't have thought about before on my own, or that are outside of the traditional things that I would do with students. And sometimes I'll just find one mentor text that inspires like an entire unit. So, keep that idea of mentor text in the back of your mind while you're doing your own reading, and just, see what jumps out at you and what might be enjoyable for your students.
And how about you, Gary? One takeaway.
I would say don't go about it alone. I read somewhere that, one of the best ways to face the pandemic context is to create. It just really gives you an opportunity to look at things in a different way and sort of feed that teacher writer part of yourself. So the fact that I was able to work with a colleague and create some of my own writing, it was really a nice experience for me. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Gary and Shannon, for all you're doing. Thank you for being here today. And to everyone who tuned in to this episode of Writing and Teaching with True Writing Project and Digital Literacies Collaborative, I hope that you have found some inspiration to incorporate mentor text into your high school classroom. And we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.